Fox News alert on major developments now in the Obama administration's attempt to address the controversy behind changes to the infamous talking points in the terror attack that killed 4 Americans in Benghazi last September. Brand new hour here of America Live. Welcome, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. The State Department now holding its first news conference since the White House released some 100 pages of emails related to the Benghazi terror attack. Keep in mind, it did not want to release these emails to the public initially, but then some were leaked to a couple of reporters. The administration leaked one that it thought was helpful to it. Then came the call to release all of them, and now we've gotten about 100. Congress says in total there are 25,000. The administration released those documents late yesterday that were exchanged among officials in the White House, State Department, and the intel community, all of whom helped shape the talking points following the assault that left 4 Americans dead, the talking points that would be used by Susan Rice to go out in the Sunday talk shows. The internal documents show that this administration, the State Department and the White House in particular, had a very big hand in crafting the final story. And that directly contradicts what we had been told by the White House was the role of the White House and the State Department on this matter. Our chief Washington correspondent, James Rosen, joins us live with the very latest. James?
Megyn, good afternoon. As you say, a number of public statements by White House Press Secretary Jay Carney about Benghazi and about the involvement of the White House in the shaping and reshaping of these 12 versions of the talking points now appear to be contradicted by the information contained in these emails. Here is one such statement.
But the only edits made by anyone here at the White House were stylistic and non-substantive. They corrected the description of the building or the facility in Benghazi from consulate to diplomatic facility and the like.
Yet at 6:48 p.m. on that fateful Friday, September 14, National Security Council spokesman Tommy Vitor emailed his interagency colleagues to alert them that John Brennan, then a White House counterterrorism aide, now CIA director, quote, will have edits to the talking points. 4 minutes later, Vitor emailed out Brennan's edits, which included him deleting the CIA's assessment that the attackers hailed, quote, from across many sectors of Libyan society. Also, Jay Carney insisted there was no evidence in all of the initial information to suggest Benghazi was a premeditated attack, a claim belied in these 94 pages of emails, wherein FBI and CIA state repeatedly that al-Qaeda was involved. Indeed, at one point, a CIA official writes that it was the State Department that posed, quote, major reservations with much or most of the talking points, and added, we revised the document with their concerns in mind. Now, a major player in all of that was then State Department spokeswoman Victoria Nuland. That evening of September 14, she emailed to complain about the CIA's expressions of certainty about the nature of the attackers. At 7:16 p.m., Nuland emailed, quote, the line about knowing there were extremists among the demonstrators will come back to us at podium. How do we know? Who are they? Etc. 23 minutes later, without any reply to her earlier email, Nuland wrote again, this time saying, quote, I just had a convo with redacted name, and added on that basis, I have serious concerns about all the parts highlighted below. And that's when Nuland commenced the argument that we have been reporting on for more than a week now about whether or not we want to be feeding any narratives about how CIA gave previous warnings and so forth. Megyn.
James, as I read these talking points that were originally put together by the CIA, they do make reference to a spontaneous attack, then they changed it to spontaneous demonstrations. And what they say is, this is the first version before State Department weighed in. We believe, based on the currently available info, that the attacks in Benghazi were spontaneously inspired by the protests at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo and evolved into a direct assault. Now, to me, that in part answers the question of how the video got injected into all of this, because the protests over in Cairo were based, at least in part, on the video. And so that could be where they started to go with this video narrative. Now, what the original talking points also had tons of references to terror and al-Qaeda and Ansar al-Sharia, right, and prior warnings of surveillance on the Benghazi consulate, all of which put that initial comment in context, and that was all removed. But does this now answer the question of who first injected the video into the matter?
It doesn't. I mean, obviously it comes from the talking points themselves hail from within or emanate from within the intelligence community. You are astute to put your finger, I think, on this question of how there was ever any reporting about a demonstration. Let's remember the testimony at the May 8 hearing just last week of Greg Hicks, the #2 U.S. diplomat in Libya, on this whole question about whether there was ever a protest or a demonstration outside the Benghazi compound.
And so did you report to anyone in Washington within the first couple of days that there was anything in connection, a protest in connection to a YouTube video?
No, the only report that our mission made through every channel was that there had been an attack on a consulate.
Was there anything in connection to a YouTube video? Was there any awareness that it was the events occurred because of a YouTube video?
The YouTube video was a non-event in Libya.
Now, back home in Washington, the State Department officials there also knew that there was never any demonstration or protest outside the Benghazi compound prior to the attack. We know that from the testimony of the State Department officials themselves last October. The CIA also knew better because the station chief in Tripoli on the 12th of September cabled back to Washington that this was a terrorist attack. So at best, perhaps the best that could be said for the inclusion of demonstrations and protests in even the early versions of these talking points was that there was perhaps an instance here of analytic laziness. That is to say, we observed a lot of protest outside U.S. installations around the world on the 10th of September. We have this situation in Benghazi on the 11th. It must be part and parcel of the same thing.
James Rosen, thank you.
Thank you.
For more, we're joined by Simon Rosenberg. He's the president and founder of NDN, a left-leaning think tank, also former Clinton campaign advisor, and Mark Thiessen, who's a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and a former speechwriter for President George W. Bush. Your reaction to that report that we just went through, Mark?
Well, it's shocking. And the fact is, look, we've been hearing for months now that Susan Rice just went out and read the intelligence assessment, the objective intelligence assessment that was provided to her. Well, first of all, we know that this intelligence assessment did not include a mention of an internet video. She inserted that herself. But two, we know that there was a huge fight within the administration over what should be said in those talking points, and it was the State Department that was actively watering down these talking points. It was Toria Nuland who went out and asked for the removal of the reference to Ansar al-Sharia, and it was Toria Nuland who asked for the removal of the reference to the fact that they had been warned repeatedly about the threats in Benghazi because she didn't want members of Congress to beat them up. And I find it incredible that they were saying her actually, and I'll give you her reason for it was because why do we want the Hill to be fingering Ansar al-Sharia when we aren't doing that ourselves until we have the investigation results? So they were not willing to blame al-Qaeda, who they knew and believed was behind the attack, until there was a completed investigation. But they were willing to blame an internet video and a demonstration that never happened without any evidence whatsoever. What are the difference between these two things? Al-Qaeda attack is embarrassing for the president and for the administration because he just completed a convention where he said that Al-Qaeda was on the run, but an internet video is not embarrassing for them. So this was clearly a CYA operation, and that's what we're seeing out of these emails.
Simon, if she had just come out and said what the memo said, that we believe these attacks were spontaneously inspired by the protests at U.S. Embassy in Cairo, which were in part linked based on a video. But I want to contextualize that for you, because the CIA has told us, they had warned us, that there had been 5 other attacks, that the Benghazi compound had been under surveillance, that Ansar al-Sharia, an al-Qaeda-linked group, was on the rise and had been making threats, and that the CIA station chief reported real time that this was a terrorist attack. We wouldn't have had any of these problems.
Well, I don't think that we have learned anything new in the last couple of weeks. I mean, what we've known all along, that I'm answering your question, Megyn, right?
Did you know that the State Department was heavily involved in editing the talking points?
Megyn, I'm going to answer your question, right, which is that we know that there were terrible mistakes made on the ground in Libya that allowed this tragic event to happen, and we know that for several weeks afterwards, the administration was confused about what happened.
No, they weren't. And so, no, they weren't. We don't know that.
Megyn, I think that all the back and forth that you've seen in these emails make it clear that there was not consensus about what had happened. And that consensus really arrived 4 or 5 days later after the Susan Rice testimony, when everything kind of settled down.
Okay, but you're dodging my question about did you know that the State Department was so heavily involved in editing these talking points, which Jay Carney directly told us did not happen?
I don't think it's surprising. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's, as I said on this show literally 10 other times in the last several months, there was tremendous confusion, bureaucratic confusion, in the aftermath of this tragic event. It took about 2 weeks for it to get cleared up.
I have to tell you, it is surprising. I may be naive. I may be naive, but it's surprising to me because Jay Carney said this on November 28, 2012. Listen.
Okay.
What the White House and the State Department have made clear that the single adjustment that was made to those talking points by either of these two institutions were changing the word consulate to diplomatic facility because consulate was inaccurate. Those talking points originated from the intelligence community. They reflected the IC's best assessments of what they thought had happened.
Maybe I'm just naive because I was still believing Jay Carney until I saw all this evidence, Mark.
Well, Simon's just said that he's been on the show 10 times saying that there was confusion. He's actually been on the show 10 times saying that Susan Rice just read what the intelligence community told her. And that's not true.
I never said that.
The State Department was heavily involved in editing these talking points in a CYA operation. It was the State Department that removed the reference to the fact that they had been warned repeatedly that Al Qaeda had carried out attacks and that the threat was rising. It was the State Department that took out the reference to Ansar al-Sharia, which would have put the whole thing in context. So the State Department was actively editing these comments. And the fact is, these talking points were so bad. The emails we don't have, Megyn, that I really want to see are the ones that describe where Hillary Clinton turns down the chance to go on the Sunday shows, and David Petraeus turns down the chance to go on the Sunday shows. We know that Petraeus said these talking points are useless. He wouldn't say them. So why did Susan Rice, who Obama said had nothing to do with Benghazi, come out and become the administration spokesman? Was she the Mikey of administration spokesman who would just say anything? Because it's clear nobody else wanted to go out and deliver these talking points.
Simon, did Jay Carney mislead us or didn't he?
Certainly appears today that what Jay Carney said in November, I guess it was not 100% accurate.
And then again in May. And then again in May.
Okay. And so, but I want to say one thing about Ansar al-Sharia, because you brought it up several times, Megyn, is that General Petraeus in his testimony in front of Congress said that he wanted the reference to Ansar al-Sharia out of those talking points because he was concerned about tipping our hand and letting those guys know that we were going to come after them, right? And that he actively sought to remove the reference to Ansar al-Sharia. You can go look at the testimony, it's public testimony. And so the point I'm trying to make here is that I don't think anything has materially changed, right? In this, we know there's been confusion.
But I think you undermine your argument.
Asserting that there was misleading. You're asserting that there was people misleading. I don't think anybody was misleading anybody in this.
You just admitted Jay Carney was. You're telling me Jay Carney was being truthful in that statement? He made a mistake twice in November and again in May?
Megyn, there have been mistakes made in this, Megyn. There have clearly been mistakes made.
It is not a mistake to say that it was only stylistic changes and only one word was changed. That's not a mistake when we now know that the White House was the one meeting on this issue. Can we have some honesty? Wouldn't it be so great? I got to go. Thank you, guys.